Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about the movie The Kingsman. The Kingsman is the third installment in the Kingsman franchise, directed by Matthew Vaughn, who has done other works like Kick-Ass 1 and Kick-Ass 2, and maybe Kick-Ass 3 one day? Fingers crossed. But The Kingsman is a prequel to The Kingsman Secret Service and The Kingsman Golden Circle, and takes place many years prior to these two other movies. This movie follows the Duke of Oxford, played by Ralph Fiennes, and his son, Conrad, as they attempt to stop an elite group of villains who are in very influential positions in hierarchies around the world that are wanting to start a global war. It comes down to them and their friends to stop these villains, so they must work together against a ticking clock and many angry countries. Obviously, having seen the two previous films, I was very interested in seeing this one. I was excited to see a great cast for this film as well. So I went into it with the expectations of it being another great film. And I hate myself a little bit. So without further ado, let's get into the 6 things that make a movie terrible. Number 1, the plot. The plot of this movie seems pretty solid, just like the other films, although instead of there being 1 or 2 villains, there's a whole band of villains that are working together to make this happen. But this plot is riddled with issues. First of all, there's a subplot to this film having to do with World War II. At the very beginning of the movie, the Duke of Oxford's wife is killed, and she makes the Duke promise to never let their son Conrad see war. So what's the first thing the Duke of Oxford does? Trains him in every form of war that he can, but then spends the next 3/4 of the film telling Conrad that he can't go to war, that he shouldn't go to war, that he can't go to these different countries where there might be war. So the promise is already broken, but you're also pretending to still try to uphold it. And I wouldn't make such a big deal out of this if it didn't take up 3/4 of the movie. And the main issue is that this subplot, although weak and underdeveloped, is still easier to hold on to and grasp than the main plot of the movie. The plot of this movie is chop, 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 chop. And it's we have to go do this and then do this and then get evidence for that, but wait, that wasn't good enough. And then get this and then I'm having a seizure here because we're going through so much. And it was just very poorly done. So objectively, the plot was as simple as the other movies, but it was just done in such a poor way that the subplot was actually paid more attention to than the actual plot. So plot gets a thumbs down. 2 is family friendliness. Just like the first 2 films, this movie's not family friendly. Though this movie doesn't have as much violence as the other films do, it still is graphic in everything that it does do. There's some strange, weird moments that are a little too edgy for PG-13. But the main factor that drives this film to the R rating is profanity, which is throughout this film. So family friendliness gets a thumbs down. 3 is acting and script. Like I said, one of the driving factors to me wanting to watch this movie was not only the other 2 movies, but all of the cast. But even in this movie, I felt like the acting was not great. I really like Gemma Arterton, but she felt so out of place in this movie. Her character in and of itself really clashed with the other characters. And the most surprising thing to me is that Digimon Hunsu, who is, in my mind, one of the most underrated actors currently in cinema. By the end of the film, it just seemed like he didn't even really want to be there. Daniel Bruhl was barely in this movie. Stanley Tucci was in it for 1 scene. Conrad Oxford delivered a rather uninspiring performance. And Ralph Fiennes, well, he tried his best, but it looked like he was just there for a paycheck too, which I think is large part due to the script. Now I had to look into this a little bit because I was like, what changed between Secret Service, Golden Circle, and then this movie? What changed? And the only difference that I could find was a man named Karl Gajusek. He's the only addition to the making of this film that's different from the other 2. The script of this movie is sloppy, it's awful, it's so poorly written. The dialogue between characters is all over the place. And one of the things that really accentuated the choppiness of the plot and the script was the fact that for at least half of this film, many of the scenes are under a minute or a minute and a half each. And it became really obvious about halfway through the film. It was really distracting. And especially with what you come to at the end of the film, it was all a wash. And if Carl is the reason for this, then screw you, Carl! Acting and script get a huge thumbs down. 4 is character development. Like I said, the subplot of this film overshadows the actual plot of this film, and you are left guessing for about 3/4 of the film who the main protagonist is. Is it the Duke of Oxford? Or is it his son, Conrad? Or is it both? Or should it be Digimon Hunsu? This film really tries to play into the idea of having dual protagonists, which is not a bad plan, but because of the lack of character development, you're left having to guess until about 3/4 of the way through the film. Really, only character development that you try to get is done through the subplot of Conrad wanting to join the war and his father, the Duke, stopping him, preventing him from doing it. By then, you've wasted half the film on something that didn't build the character of either one of them. And then Conrad's character ends up being about as deep and developed as a kiddie pool. And as far as the side characters go, there is no character development. They try to force some weird love relationship between the Duke and Polly, played by Gemma Arterton, and that doesn't go anywhere. And then Digimon Hunsu seems like he's going to play a bigger role in the film than he actually ends up playing, which obviously is disappointing. Which is truly a bummer because this movie had the cast, it had potential to be good. Why they went to a prequel instead of a sequel, I don't know. Another thing with character development was the villain. Oh, baby! The villain of this movie has no character development at all. The identity of the villain is not revealed until the end of the film and is about one of the most underwhelming moments I've ever experienced in cinema. Seriously, the writer of this script was garbage. Easily the worst villain of all 3 movies, but the character development was very poor. Huge thumbs down. 5 is CG. I like that they stick with some of the stylistic choices in their CG. The action sequences have this camera shake every time a punch or a hit lands, and I think that's really creative and really cool and original. I'd say probably one of the only fight scenes, and perhaps the longest fight scene in this movie, involves the character of Rasputin, and that scene is enjoyable to watch. There is some CG and there is some actual blocking that is really cool. But they did rely on CG heavily in a lot of this movie, which wasn't enough to save the film from all the bad that was going on. So CG gets a 50-50. 6 is rewatchability.
No, God! No, God, please, no!
This movie was so painful to watch. Between the choppiness of all the scenes, the lack of character development with all the characters, A-list actors who on screen seemed like they didn't even want to be there, and the fact that this movie has no connection to the other 2 films. And so I have to give rewatchability absolutely huge thumbs down. After the scene where Ralph Fiennes was falling for about 25 hours, there came a moment in the film where I said to my wife, if this happens at the end of this film, I will give this movie a 0 out of 10. Guess what happened about 3 minutes later? I shook on it. Because of that, I have to give The Kingsman a 0 out of 10. This movie was an absolute stain on the movie making of Matthew Vaughn, and was disappointing all the way around. You come to the end of this film, 1, wondering why you spent the time watching it, and 2, missing Taron Egerton and the beautiful cast that makes up the first 2 Kingsman movies. This movie set itself up for a sequel, and even as it did that, it almost seems satirical because the setup for the sequel was disgustingly bad as well. So with that being said, The Kingsman is definitely not worth your time. Thank you so much for watching. If you've seen The Kingsman, or even know who it is or where he is, let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. As always, thank you for your love and support, and I'll catch you guys and gals in the next one.